So I have a very, very big sermon that I have to fit into a itty bitty little space. So I may talk a little fast. So listen as fast as you can. Okay? Here we go. This is an important passage. This is an incredibly important passage. Oh, it's about the manna. I know all about the manna. I know that God fed the people with the manna. What else do we need to know? This is much more important than you realize. First of all, it's given a lot of space. Whenever you have a story that's given pages or given a lot of treatment, it's because it's important, and details are important, and those kinds of things have to be paid attention to. The main subject, manna, well, that was preserved in the Ark of the Covenant. What other things do you know that were in the Ark of the Covenant? Well, the Ten Commandments were in there, and Aaron's rod that budded. And then there was the manna. Now, being put into the Ark of the Covenant really tells you that it is important. God wants us to remember and to think about it. And He wants to communicate something very important by it. Its meaning is expanded upon by Jesus in the only miraculous sign. Hear me out. The only miraculous sign that you'll find in all four Gospels. Okay? That relates to manna. That relates also to the bread and the wine. Okay? We're all kind of bringing everything together here. And it's important that we understand why. What is really being communicated? First of all, it tells us something about God. You know that the Israelites are new to Him. I mean, he doesn't. I'm not saying He doesn't know them. I'm saying that they don't know Him. And so they're learning about Him, and they're trying to learn how to live with Him, to have a God who is like Him. This morning we read in the book of Deuteronomy about what other nation in the world was ever chosen by God and was drawn out of another nation through miraculous signs and wonders, walking through the sea and brought into the wilderness that He might take care of them in His love. What other nation? No other nation. He must really love these people. And He does so on account of Abraham, his friend. And He made the covenant promise with Abraham, Isaac, and with Jacob. And He's a God who continues and keeps His promises. You need to understand that. Even when things look like He's not keeping His promise, He is. And as I said before, when we talked about the sicknesses, God many times brings His people deliberately into situations that they cannot handle and are terrified by, so that He might demonstrate to them that He Himself is trustworthy. And this is one of those situations. So the people grumble against the Lord, against Moses first, Moses and Aaron, and they say, guys, you can't be complaining against us, because when you do it, you're complaining against God, because He's the one who tells us what to do. So when you complain to us, you're complaining against Him. You don't want to do that, because He loves you, and because He has saved you, and He is almighty, and He is the one who creates the universe. Don't complain against Him. He knows what He's doing. Instead, like we learned last week, pray to Him. Ask Him. Glorify Him. You remember we talked about Jehoshaphat. When the three armies came over the hill, he had no idea what to do. There was nothing, actually, he could do. And so he calls the people together for prayer. And he worships God. He talks to God and tells Him all the wonderful things He has done. God, You've been so good to us. You've carried us through the wilderness, brought us to this land. You've given us places that we didn't build. You enabled us to build this temple of worship for You. And now look, we came through these people's lands and we left them alone because You told us to. And now, Lord, look upon what they're doing to us. And we are dependent upon You. We don't know what to do ourselves. Lord, You need to help us, and he does. He did. He took care of the enemy himself. And so God revealed himself as one who loves his people, even when it doesn't look like it. Like there's an emergency. And why did this happen? I was having a nice, comfortable existence, and, well, you've shaken it all to bits. And that wasn't what I was expecting. But I'm going to trust you is the right lesson to be learned. So, God promises that he will provide bread for his people. He says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. Okay, what people? Name one. Name one nation that's at the Olympics. Let's just go there. What nation at the Olympics has ever had God raining bread down on their people? Anybody? Nobody. Anybody else in history? Nobody else in history. Is this a big deal? That God rains bread down from heaven? Well, it's not water, but God does that too. No. This is about him providing food for them every single day. It's a miracle. Do you hear me? It's a miracle that bread comes down from heaven. He's promising to do 3 miracles for them every day. 2 more on Friday and 1 on Saturday. And then there's one that's going to last forever. Okay? What miracles are we talking about? Sunday through Thursday, he's going to give them manna, and he's going to melt the leftovers. He makes manna that doesn't just dry up. It melts. It goes away. Many trash men are taken out of business because this is what happens. God has provided the food, and he's provided it in a way that it will disappear after it's not needed. And he'll melt the manna, and then at night he's going to bring the quail every day, except for one. On Friday, he's going to do 2 more miracles. He's going to double the manna, and he's going to preserve the manna until through Saturday. All the other days, if they keep the manna beyond to the next day, it gets bad. It spoils. It gets maggots in it. But on this one day, and this is going to happen every week, okay? It isn't like a fluke, right? He brings manna in every single day, it melts, and then he brings in quail, and then the 6th day before the Sabbath, he's going to give them twice as much, and it's going to last overnight. This really sounds a lot like forethought. It sounds like there's purpose in it, wouldn't you say? There's purpose in this. And then on the day in which is the Sabbath, there's another miracle. There's no manna. All right? When you get into a rhythm going every day, and then there's one without, that's intentional. That's important for us to see and to understand what it means. So he tells the people, come. God reveals himself in this cloud with his glory. He speaks directly to the people. He says to Moses, say this to them. Say to the entire, Moses told Aaron to say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. It sounds almost like he's going to beat you, right? He heard your grumbling, and now you're going to get it. It isn't that at all. When he says he's heard your grumbling, it means that he is now going to respond. God is gracious. They grumbled at Marah when the water was bad. Now they're grumbling today. They didn't learn from Marah. They're grumbling today. And we're going to find out that when they get to the place of Rephidim, there's going to be no water. They're going to grumble again. God is very patient. He is showing them that grumbling doesn't get what you want. Grumbling is a sin. It is wrong for you to do. Wrong also today for us to grumble against God. And so he said, I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to give to you this manna. And so he does it. He says he's going to do it, and he does it. In verse 13, he sends quail. That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And the Israelites saw it, and they said to each other, what is it? What's that? What's that? And so that name stuck. That's what manna means. Man means what? What is it? We do things like that. You know how you talk about somebody from, the class of your graduation? What's his name? You call him what's his name because you can't remember what his name is. They called it what's it because they couldn't figure out a name for it. They've never seen anything like this before. So, hey, Mom, what's it? It's out there. What's it's out there? We need to go out there and get what we're supposed to get. Which is interesting because they were to get just the right amount. He says, it is bread the Lord has given you to eat, and this is what the Lord commanded you. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. Very specific. That people will not overeat, undereat, be left out. They are to take an omer for each person. An omer is 2 quarts amount. And so they are to use that every day. Not to save it overnight, because if they do, it will stink and it will have maggots. Except on the 6th day, because they're making preparations for the Sabbath. So they are to dispose of the leftovers. And 2 omers are gathered per person on Friday. Leftovers are to be saved for Saturday because they are not supposed to go out and gather that day. This is before the 10 Commandments. You understand that. The 4th commandment about the Sabbath has not yet been given to them. This is God preparing them for that. This is the kind of relationship. He is setting up a rhythm of life for them. A rhythm of life in which he provides what they will need for life. Because if he doesn't give them the bread every single day and twice on Friday, none on Saturday, if he doesn't do that, they will die. They will die. That's how important this is. This is life-giving. And the rhythm is that I'm going to give it to you every day. You will have what you need every day. Everyone will have enough. None will have too much. None will have too little. That's how God provides. None will have too much, and none will have too little. Now, when I talk about this in terms of how God put this rhythm in effect in the Israelite community, this is not to say that if we're all good Christians, well, then everybody's going to have enough and nobody's going to have too little. There are ways in which God has provided for us to be giving to one another. This was the provision for these people in this situation where they are traveling in the desert, in the wilderness, and have nothing to draw upon for their resources. This is special, and it will continue for 40 years. So the rhythm is that I'm going to provide for you every single day, and I will provide for you until the day in which you are taken into the land of paradise, that is the promised land, and then it will be provided from the land. All right, there's that rhythm of provision every single day. That tells us that we should be thanking God for our provisions every single day. But what about this hiccup at the end of the week? Why did he include double on Friday, nothing on Saturday? That was another principle, another rhythm that people needed to understand, that they live in the context of the Almighty God. They need to recognize that it is He who is protecting them, He who is watching over them, He who is providing for them, and there needs to be a day where they set aside that they might express their gratitude and love and worship to Him. Eat it today, Moses said, because today is the Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Why this? Why for them? Because God is saying it needs to be an every week thing. It really could be everyday thing. But there needs to be a day that you set aside that you worship God. That hasn't stopped. That is not something that was for them back there. The coming of the manna, yeah, that was for them back then. But the observance of a day of rest and a day of worship, a day that belongs to God, has not changed. And we need to be observing it too. And so this is something for us. It's not that, I don't believe he's saying here, listen, if you could spare a Saturday a month, or if you could, spare me a couple of Saturdays. I know you're busy. I know that you got places to go and things to do. You got games to go watch. You got relatives to visit. If you don't have any of those things, would you take some time to worship? It doesn't appear that way at all. He doesn't even discuss what might be things that would get in the way. He simply says, there's a day which is mine, and in which you and I will grow close together, and we'll share a fellowship, and you'll have the opportunity to worship. And that's the rhythm that I desire for you. Well, okay. I think that he will probably ask us about that someday when we're standing before him. At the end, we read about the preservation of the manna. He says, make sure you put it in a container, and then you put it in a place before the Lord. The ark wasn't made yet. There was no tabernacle yet. But he wanted it in intent of presence where he would meet with Moses. And that would be a reminder to the people. After they are no longer getting manna, there is this reminder that God took care of us for 40 years, and there is no other God like him. So what's the meaning of this? What is the meaning of manna? Jesus helped us to interpret what God was pointing forward to in doing what he was doing for the people. He was giving them life in the desert, in the place where there was no water, no food. He became their food. He was the one who provided life for them. In the book of John, chapter 6, we have the story of Jesus feeding another multitude. This is a multitude of 2 million in the Old Testament. Jesus feeds a multitude of 500,000 men, probably 20,000 people in total. And it occurs after a miracle of his walking across the water. It occurs before he walks across the water. And after that, he explains what all of this was about. It was a context that's got a lot of similarities to the Exodus. And I think that was intentional. He feeds the multitude. He feeds them in a place where there's no food, in the wilderness. He uses 5 loaves and 2 fishes. That equals 7, the number 7, the number of completeness. Kind of harkens back to that everyone was satisfied. Nobody had too much and nobody had too little. But then we also see that there were 12 baskets that were gathered because everyone was full. And God is able to meet our needs completely. And that's part of the message. And then Jesus begins to speak in ways that really disturbed the people. He said in John 6:48, I am the bread of life. In the Old Testament, they read of God providing the bread of life as it rained down upon the people. But Jesus says, I am that bread of life. And now we've ratcheted up this whole concept of life. In the Old Testament, they were given physical life, but they all died. Jesus says, he who eats this bread, which is come down from heaven, will never die. I am that bread of heaven. He who eats my body and drinks my blood will have life. People really found that hard to swallow because, well, how are they going to eat his body and drink his blood? He didn't mean it that way. What he was saying was that he was going to offer his body and he would shed his blood. And those who believe in him, you read John chapter 6 and you'll see, he says, this is what I'm saying. To believe in the one who has sent me, believe that I am the bread of life, and you'll never die. This is what Jesus came. God was picturing it in the Old Testament, in feeding his people. He has made a reality of it in an exponentially more significant way in the death of Jesus, giving his own body and his own blood that he might pay the penalty for sin. We come here and we celebrate communion. Now, we are not eating Jesus' body and we're not drinking his blood. These are symbols that represent his body. Jesus told us to do this. This is my body, which is broken for you. This is the blood of the New Testament, the new covenant that is ratified in Jesus' blood on our behalf. This is what we celebrate. We know that Jesus' body was broken for us, and as bread gives us life, Jesus gave us spiritual life, which is eternal forever. And we drink this cup because it represents his blood, which is that which ratifies the covenant, signifies his death. There can be no inheritance from a covenant until the death of the testator, and that was Jesus. He died, therefore these things became ours. We have now been given the promise of eternal life because of his death on our behalf. So you see how much it was important for God to give the detail in the Old Testament of do it this way, and you will say something. You will say something that it is God who provides life. You'll say it is God whom we return worship to because he has given us life. And so when we come together this morning, that is what we're doing. We're returning worship on the day that he has set aside for us to use for him, that we might say thank you. And let's do that now.